The engine was still idling. The GPS was active. There was even a half-eaten meal on the captain's table, still warm. But the ship, completely empty. For a decade, authorities said the crew of the Aethon was swept away by a storm. But dead men don't talk, until now. I tracked down the only survivor who made it off that boat alive, and according to him, it wasn't a wave that took the crew. It was something that climbed on board. The ocean has always been humanity's greatest mystery. We have mapped distant galaxies with more precision than we have charted the depths beneath our own waves. And within those uncharted waters, vessels vanish. Crews disappear. Ships are found drifting, perfectly intact, with coffee still steaming in mugs and music still playing through speakers. Yet not a single soul remains to explain what happened. These are not legends from centuries past. These are documented incidents from our modern age, occurring with disturbing regularity, and the explanations offered by maritime authorities grow thinner with each passing year. I've spent the better part of 3 years investigating what the maritime community refers to in hushed whispers as silent departures. These are vessels discovered adrift with no signs of struggle, no evidence of mechanical failure, and no logical reason for their crews to have abandoned ship. The official reports always read the same way. Presumed lost at sea. Likely weather-related incident. Case closed. But I have learned that official reports are often written by people who have never set foot on these vessels, who have never seen the evidence that was photographed before it was scrubbed from existence, and who answer to organizations that have far more interest in silence than in truth. The Aethon became my obsession in the winter of 2024, when I stumbled upon a declassified Coast Guard document that should have remained buried. The cargo freighter had been discovered drifting approximately 200 nautical miles off the coast of Iceland in October of 2015. According to the initial report, the vessel was found in perfect operational condition. The engines were running. Navigation systems were functional. The emergency beacon had never been activated. Personal belongings remained in crew quarters, photographs of loved ones still pinned above bunks. 12 crew members had been registered on the manifest. 12 people who, according to every official statement released to the public, had been swept overboard during a sudden squall. But here is what the official statements never mentioned. There was no storm in that region during the 48 hours preceding the Aethon's discovery. Satellite imagery confirmed calm seas and clear skies. Weather data was available, verified, and subsequently classified under maritime security protocols that I had never encountered in my years of research. Someone wanted the storm narrative to hold, and they were willing to bury evidence to ensure it did. The photographs from the Coast Guard's initial boarding told a story that contradicted everything in the final report. I obtained these images from a source who refused to be identified, a former investigator who had worked the Aethon case before being reassigned without explanation. The images showed the captain's quarters in perfect order, a meal half consumed on the table, a logbook open to a page dated October 14th. The final entry was incomplete, the pen still lying across the page as if the writer had been interrupted mid-sentence. The words that remained were haunting in their simplicity. Something in the water. Not fish. Watching us since dawn. Crew reports hearing. The sentence ended there. No period. No conclusion. Just silence captured in ink. I began reaching out to anyone connected to the Aethon investigation. Maritime officials refused comment. Insurance investigators cited confidentiality agreements. Families of the missing crew members had been paid settlements that included non-disclosure clauses preventing them from speaking publicly about the incident. Every door I approached was slammed shut with practiced efficiency, and every refusal only deepened my certainty that I was approaching something that powerful people wanted to remain hidden. Then in March of this year, I received an encrypted message from an anonymous sender. The contents were brief but electrifying. You are asking about the Aethon. You should know there was a 13th person on that ship. He did not die with the others. If you want the truth, stop looking at the water. Start looking at who profits from the silence. A 13th person. The manifest recorded 12. Every official document confirmed 12. Yet someone was claiming that a survivor existed, someone whose presence had been erased from the record entirely. I traced the message through channels I am not at liberty to disclose, and after weeks of false leads and dead ends, I found myself standing outside a weathered fishing cottage on the remote northern coast of Norway. The man who lived there had changed his name 3 times in 10 years. He had no digital footprint, no credit cards, no official identification. According to every database accessible to the public, he did not exist. But he was real, and he was willing to talk. What he told me over the course of the following days would fundamentally alter my understanding of what happened aboard the Aethon. His account would expose not just a cover-up, but a pattern of deliberate concealment stretching back decades. He spoke of things that challenged the boundaries of rational explanation, of events that occurred in those final hours that no official investigation would ever acknowledge. His name, the one he gave me permission to use, was Victor Holmberg. He was the ship's secondary communications officer, a position that did not officially exist on the Aethon's crew manifest. And according to Victor, what happened on that vessel had nothing to do with weather, nothing to do with accidents, and everything to do with something that had been following ships along that particular corridor of ocean for longer than anyone wanted to admit. The Aethon was not an isolated incident. It was merely the latest in a chain of disappearances that someone was working very hard to ensure would never be connected. Before I could fully understand Victor Holmberg's account of what transpired aboard the Aethon, I needed to recognize that his story did not exist in isolation. The ocean guards its secrets with ruthless efficiency, but patterns emerge for those willing to look beyond the sanitized reports and carefully worded press releases. In my research, I uncovered 3 incidents that preceded the Aethon by years, each bearing the same inexplicable hallmarks, each dismissed with explanations that disintegrated under the slightest scrutiny. The first was the cargo vessel Prometheus Star, discovered adrift in the Sea of Japan in August of 2009. The ship had been transporting industrial equipment from South Korea to Vladivostok, a routine voyage that should have taken 4 days. Contact was lost on day 2. When Japanese Coast Guard vessels located the Prometheus Star 6 days later, they found a ship frozen in the middle of an ordinary moment. Crew quarters showed beds that had been slept in, showers still wet, personal electronics charging in outlets. The galley contained breakfast preparations abandoned mid-task, eggs still in a pan that had long since gone cold. 8 crew members had been aboard. None were ever found. The official investigation concluded that the crew had abandoned ship, though no explanation was offered for why they would have done so. The lifeboats remained secured in their positions. Personal flotation devices hung untouched. There was no fire, no flooding, no mechanical emergency that would have necessitated evacuation. The investigation also failed to address the strangest detail of all. Every mirror on the ship had been covered. Bed sheets, towels, and clothing had been draped over every reflective surface, from the bathroom mirrors to the polished metal fixtures in the bridge. No one in an official capacity ever explained why a crew preparing for breakfast would have taken the time to cover every mirror on their vessel before vanishing. The second incident occurred in 2012 when a fishing trawler called the Northern Promise was located approximately 300 miles off the coast of Newfoundland. The vessel had been reported overdue by its home port, and search efforts had been mounted expecting to find wreckage. Instead, they found a ship in perfect working condition, its nets still deployed in the water, its catch beginning to decay in the holding bay. 6 fishermen had been aboard. The official report stated that all 6 had likely fallen overboard during net retrieval operations, a tragic but not unprecedented accident in the dangerous world of commercial fishing. But the evidence did not support this conclusion. The net retrieval log indicated that operations had been halted 12 hours before the estimated time of disappearance. More disturbing were the recordings recovered from the ship's communication system. In the final transmission to the home port, the captain's voice was calm, almost unnaturally so. He reported that the crew had observed unusual activity in the waters surrounding the vessel, describing it as something large circling beneath the surface. He requested guidance on protocol and was advised to maintain position and await support. That support never arrived. By the time rescue vessels reached the Northern Promise, the captain and his crew had joined the ocean's collection of unanswered questions. The third case struck closest to the circumstances of the Aethon. In 2014, a research vessel called the Meridian was conducting oceanographic surveys in the Norwegian Sea when all communication suddenly ceased. The ship was found 1 week later by a passing commercial tanker, drifting with all systems functional. The 12-person scientific team aboard had vanished entirely. Their research equipment remained operational, data still being collected by automated systems, but the researchers themselves were gone.
Personal journals recovered from the vessel contained entries that grew increasingly unsettling in the days before the disappearance. One researcher wrote of recurring dreams shared by multiple team members, dreams of something ancient rising from the seabed. Another documented unexplained sounds picked up by sonar equipment, sounds that did not match any known marine life. The pattern was undeniable once I laid these cases side by side. Ships found in operational condition, crews vanished without explanation, evidence of something anomalous observed in the water before each disappearance. And in every instance, official investigations that seemed designed to obscure rather than illuminate. I began to see the Aethon not as an isolated tragedy, but as part of a sequence that stretched across years and continents. Victor Holberg confirmed my suspicions when I presented my research to him during our second meeting. He listened without interruption as I detailed the Prometheus star, the Botham Promise, and the Neridian. When I finished, he simply nodded, a gesture that carried the weight of someone who had long accepted a truth that others refused to see. He told me that the maritime industry maintains what it called silent registries, unofficial databases of incidents that are deemed too disruptive to acknowledge publicly. These registries are shared among shipping companies, insurance underwriters, and certain government agencies. Their purpose is not to investigate these incidents, but to manage them, to ensure that vessels are rerouted around certain coordinates, that specific zones of ocean are avoided during particular seasons, and that anyone who asks too many questions is reminded of the professional consequences of pursuing answers. The Aethon's route had been modified 3 times in the weeks before its final voyage. Each modification pushed the ship further into waters that appeared on one of these silent registries. Victor did not understand why this had been done. He knew that Captain Henriksen had objected to the route changes and had been overruled by company representatives who would not explain their reasoning. The captain was a veteran of 30 years at sea. He knew those waters. He knew that something about the revised course was wrong. But orders were orders, and the Aethon departed on schedule. Victor recalled that the first 2 days of the voyage were uneventful, almost pleasant. The sea was calm, the weather cooperative. Then on the morning of the 3rd day, everything changed. The first sign was the silence. The ocean around them, warmly alive with the sounds of wind and wave and distant marine life, meant completely quiet. It was as if someone had turned down the volume in the wall itself.
Victor Holmberg sat across from me in that weathered cottage, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The years had carved deep lines into his face, and his eyes held the hollow quality of someone who had witnessed something that defied comprehension. He warned me before he began that his account would sound impossible. He said that he had spent 10 years questioning his own sanity, wondering if what he remembered was genuine or some elaborate defense mechanism constructed by a traumatized mind. But the details never changed, the memories never faded, and the nightmares never stopped. The silence he described on that 3rd morning was only the beginning. By midday, the crew had grown restless. First Mate Torres ordered routine checks of all communication equipment, convinced that the eerie quiet indicated some malfunction in their audio systems. Everything checked out normally. The equipment was working. The ocean was simply holding its breath. Captain Henriksen attempted to reach the company's Maritime Coordination Center to report the unusual conditions. The call connected, but the voice on the other end was not the usual coordinator. It was someone the captain did not recognize, someone who asked strange questions about their exact position and what they had observed in the water. When the captain demanded to speak with his regular contact, the line went dead. Subsequent attempts to reconnect failed. The satellite systems showed active connections, but every outgoing signal disappeared into void. Victor was monitoring secondary communication channels when he picked up something that made his blood run cold. It was a transmission on an emergency frequency, fragmented and weak but unmistakably human. The voice was repeating coordinates in a language Victor did not recognize, followed by words in broken English. "They are coming from below. Do not look at them. Do not let them see you looking." The transmission looped 3 times before dissolving into static. When Victor reported this to the captain, Henriksen's face went pale. He ordered all crew to remain inside the ship's interior compartments and to avoid the deck until further notice. For several hours, the Aethon continued its course in tense silence. Crew members gathered in the mess hall, speaking in hushed voices about what might be happening. Engineer Kowalski, a practical man who had always dismissed supernatural speculation, suggested that they had drifted into some kind of electromagnetic anomaly. He cited similar phenomena documented in various maritime studies. His rational explanation provided temporary comfort, but it could not explain what happened as evening approached. Victor was alone in the communications room when he heard the first impact. It was a heavy, wet sound against the hull, like something large had thrown itself at the ship. He froze, listening as the sound repeated at different points around the vessel. It was methodical, almost exploratory, as if something was testing the ship's integrity from the outside. The impacts continued for approximately 20 minutes before stopping as suddenly as they had begun. When Victor emerged from the communications room, he found the crew assembled in the corridor, their faces masks of controlled terror. Captain Henriksen was issuing quiet orders, organizing the men into groups, assigning specific tasks that seemed designed more to keep everyone occupied than to address any practical concern. No one spoke of what they had heard. To speak of it would be to acknowledge it, and acknowledgement would mean confronting the possibility that they were facing something beyond their understanding. Light fell, and with it came sounds that Victor still cannot fully describe. He told me they were like voices, but not human voices. They emanated from beneath the waterline, rising through the hull in waves that seemed to vibrate through the very structure of the ship. Some crew members covered their ears. Others wept silently. One man, a young deckhand named Petrov, began laughing in a high-strained pitch until Torres physically restrained him. At approximately 11 that night, someone opened the door to the main deck. Victor does not know who. No one admitted to it afterward. But the door was open, and through it came a smell that Victor described as ancient, organic, and utterly wrong. It was the smell of deep ocean, of places where sunlight had never reached, of things that had evolved in absolute darkness over millennia. Captain Henriksen ordered the door sealed and barricaded. The crew worked in frantic coordination, pushing heavy equipment against the entrance. But as they worked, Victor glimpsed something through the narrowing gap before the door closed completely. He saw movement on the deck, shapes that did not conform to any natural form. They were tall, impossibly so, and they moved with a fluidity that suggested they were not walking but rather flowing across the surface. Their outlines seemed to shift and blur, as if his eyes could not properly process what they were seeing. The barricade held through the night. No one slept. At dawn, the sound ceased, and an almost normal silence returned. Captain Henriksen made the decision to send a small team to inspect the deck while the majority of the crew remained secured inside. Torres led the team. They were gone for exactly 4 minutes. When Torres returned alone, he could barely speak. The others had simply vanished. One moment they were beside him, the next they were gone. He had not seen anything take them. He had only heard what he described as a sound like paper tearing, repeated 3 times. The crew's psychological state deteriorated rapidly after that. Some demanded they abandon ship immediately. Others insisted that leaving the interior compartments would mean certain death. Captain Henriksen maintained order through sheer force of will, but Victor could see the fear in his eyes. The captain had no answers. He was operating on instinct, making decisions that felt increasingly futile against something that did not obey the rules of the world they knew. By the second night, their numbers had dwindled to 7. Victor still cannot account for all the disappearances. Some occurred when crew members stepped away momentarily. Others happened in full view of witnesses who described the same phenomenon. A blur of movement, a sound like reality itself being torn, and then absence where a person had stood. Victor's voice grew quieter as he approached the final hours of his time aboard the Aethon. The trauma was evident in every pause, every moment where he gathered himself before continuing. But he was determined to complete his account. He said he owed it to the men who died, to the families who had been fed lies, and to whatever remained of his own conscience. By the morning of the 3rd day, only Victor and Captain Henriksen remained. They had barricaded themselves in the engine room, the deepest compartment of the ship, putting as much metal as possible between themselves and whatever stalked the decks above. The captain had stopped giving orders. He sat against the wall, staring at nothing, occasionally muttering prayers in a language Victor did not recognize. When he finally spoke clearly, His words carried the weight of someone who had accepted death. Henriksen told Victor about the route modifications. He explained that the company had received special instructions from a consortium of marine insurance underwriters to redirect the Aethon through specific coordinates. The captain had questioned this repeatedly, citing historical data that showed unusual incident rates in that region. His concerns were dismissed. He was told that the modified route was mandatory for coverage purposes, that failure to comply would void the ship's insurance entirely. He was also told, in terms that left no room for misinterpretation, that questioning the order further would end his career. Victor asked why insurance companies would deliberately route ships through dangerous waters. The captain's answer was chilling. He said that some losses are planned. He said that the maritime industry operates on scales that ordinary people cannot comprehend, that certain organizations treat ship disappearances not as tragedies but as data points. He spoke of sacrifices, of calculations made in boardrooms far from the ocean, of decisions justified by actuarial tables, and risk assessments that valued ships and crews as numbers rather than lives. When Victor pressed for more details, the captain became agitated. He said there were things in the ocean that certain people knew about, things that had been known about for centuries. He mentioned old maps, the ones that depicted sea monsters in uncharted waters. He said those illustrations were not myth, they were warnings. And certain organizations had known not to fight these things but to appease them. The conversation was interrupted by a change in the ship's movement. The engine had stopped. Victor had not shut it down. The captain had been with him continuously. Yet the engine room fell silent, the hum of machinery replaced by a stillness that pressed against their ears. Then came a sound from above. It was footsteps, but wrong, too many of them, moving in patterns that suggested limbs arranged in configurations that defied human anatomy. Captain Henriksen stood and approached the door. Victor begged him to stop, to remain in the relative safety of the engine room. But the captain seemed to be operating under a compulsion beyond his control. He said with perfect calm that he needed to see, he needed to understand. He unlocked the door and stepped through before Victor could stop him. The door swung closed behind him. Victor heard the captain's voice, loud at first, then abruptly silenced. He heard that paper-tearing sound. He heard something that might have been laughter, but deeper and more resonant than any human voice could produce. Then he heard nothing at all. For the next 6 hours, Victor remained in the engine room, wedged behind machinery, making himself as small as possible. He heard movement throughout the ship, sounds of things being displaced, of metal groaning under weights it was not designed to bear. At one point, something pressed against the engine room door with enough force to bow the reinforced metal inward. Victor held his breath, convinced that his final moment had arrived. But the pressure relented. Whatever was on the other side moved away. When the sounds finally stopped, Victor waited another 3 hours before daring to move. He found the ship exactly as rescue teams would later discover it. Operational, intact, and empty. There was no sign of the captain or any crew member. No bodies, no blood, no evidence of violence. Only absence, profound and absolute. Victor's escape was something he attributed to pure chance. He located an emergency life raft and deployed it while the deck remained clear. He drifted for 2 days before being picked up by a commercial vessel whose crew asked no questions about the traumatized man they found floating alone in the North Atlantic. The cover-up began almost immediately. Within hours of Victor's rescue, representatives from the shipping company arrived. They were accompanied by individuals who did not identify their affiliation, but carried an authority that silenced questions. Victor was taken to a private facility where he was debriefed by people who already seemed to know everything he could tell them. They were not interested in what had taken the crew. They were interested only in what Victor planned to do with what he had seen. He was offered a choice. He could accept a substantial settlement, a new identity, and passage to any country he chose, provided he never spoke of the Aethon again. Or he could refuse, in which case he was informed that the world would learn he had suffered a psychotic break at sea, that he had likely contributed to the crew's demise through negligence or sabotage, and that he would spend the remainder of his life answering for crimes that would be meticulously fabricated. Victor chose silence. For 10 years he kept that silence. He watched as the official narrative took shape, as a fictional storm was written into weather records.
as families accepted settlements that came with legal constraints preventing them from seeking the truth. He watched as the Aethon became just another entry in the long registry of maritime mysteries, its reality buried beneath layers of carefully constructed lies.
In the weeks following my meetings with Victor Holmberg, I attempted to verify his account through every channel available to me. The task proved both frustrating and illuminating. Frustrating because the records had been thoroughly sanitized, every trail leading to dead ends or classified designations. Illuminating because the very thoroughness of the concealment confirmed that something was being hidden. Ordinary incidents do not require such extensive erasure. I located a former maritime insurance analyst who agreed to speak anonymously. He confirmed the existence of what he called directed routing protocols, instructions issued to shipping companies that mandated specific courses through designated areas. He explained that these protocols were presented as risk management strategies, but the coordinates involved often contradicted standard safety practices. When I asked why vessels would be deliberately routed through dangerous, he became visibly uncomfortable. He said only that certain policies generated premiums that reflected risks the public was not meant to understand. I also discovered records of similar incidents stretching back further than I had initially researched. The Mary Celeste in 1872 was merely the most famous example. Throughout the 20th century, ships vanished under circumstances that defied conventional explanation. The Carroll A. Deering in 1921 found aground with lifeboats missing, but meals prepared in the galley. The SS Orang Medan in 1947 discovered with its entire crew dead, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. The NV Joyita in 1955 found partially submerged with no sign of its 25 passengers and crew. Each incident bore the same hallmarks: sudden disappearance, inexplicable circumstances, and investigations that concluded without answers. The official explanations for these incidents ranged from piracy to mutiny to weather. But the pattern Victor described, the silence of the ocean, the presence of something beneath the surface, appeared in survivor accounts and recovered logs across decades. A consistent phenomenon was being systematically denied existence by authorities who should have been most interested in understanding it. I began to consider explanations beyond the purely rational. The ocean covers over 70% of our planet's surface. Its average depth exceeds 12,000 feet. Vast regions remain unexplored, environments as alien to human experience as the surface of distant moons. We know more about the topography of Mars than we do about the trenches beneath our own waves. In those unexplored regions, ecosystems exist that we have barely begun to catalogue. Life forms thrive in conditions we once believed impossible. The arrogance of assuming we know everything that dwells in those depths is staggering when considered against the scale of our ignorance. Victor's description of what he glimpsed through the closing door has haunted me since he shared it. He spoke of forms that seemed to exist partially in our reality and partially elsewhere, as if they were reaching through from some adjacent space that our physics cannot properly describe. He spoke of intelligence in their movement, purpose in their presence. He did not believe they were animals in any sense we would recognize. He believed they were something older, something that had claimed the deep ocean as territory long before humanity first fashioned vessels to cross the waves. Whether Victor's account represents literal truth or psychological response to extreme trauma is a question I cannot definitively answer. But I can state with certainty that someone is investing considerable resources in ensuring that questions about these incidents are never seriously investigated. The cover-up Victor described is not a relic of the past. It is ongoing, active, and well-funded. Ships continue to vanish, crews continue to disappear, and official explanations continue to satisfy a public that prefers comfortable ignorance to uncomfortable truths. Before I concluded my final interview with Victor, I asked him why he had chosen to break his silence after 10 years. He was quiet for a long moment before answering. He said that he had recently learned of another vessel, a research ship operating in coordinates unnervingly close to where the Aethon had made its final voyage. The ship had reported unusual atmospheric conditions and anomalous readings before contact was lost. Its disappearance had not been covered by major media. Its fate remained officially undetermined. Victor said he could not save the Aethon's crew. He could not bring back Captain Henriksen, Torres, or any of the men who had died in those final terrible hours. But he could ensure that their deaths were not meaningless.
He could break the cycle of silence and force a reckoning with truths that powerful interests would prefer to keep submerged. The ocean keeps its secrets with patient cruelty. It takes what it wants and offers no explanations. But the ocean is not the only force working to conceal what happens in its depths. Human hands have shaped the narrative of maritime mystery. Human interests have profited from manufactured ignorance, and human choices have condemned crews to fates that could have been prevented. The cover-up Victor exposed is not about protecting humanity from knowledge it cannot handle. It is about protecting profits, power, and positions that depend on the public never asking the right questions. What climbed aboard the Aethon that night remains unknown. What took 12 men from a functioning vessel remains unexplained. What lurks in the corridors of ocean that insurance companies quietly advise their clients to avoid remains unacknowledged. These are the unseen depths, one of water but of deliberate concealment. And until we demand transparency from those who shape the official record, the silence will continue. Ships will sail into waters marked safe on charts that lie. Crews will vanish without warning or explanation. Families will accept settlements that bind their silence. And somewhere in the deep, patient things will continue to wait, because they have waited for centuries, and they know that we are too afraid, too compromised, or too comfortable to confront what we have always known. The ocean is not empty. It never has been, and the Aethon was not an accident. It was a sacrifice. The question that remains is simple but devastating. How many more will be made before we finally demand it?